Hey everyone, I'm here at Mad X in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm here with Jeremy Whitley, one of my absolute favorite comic book writers. I've talked about his comics on my videos in the past, most notably on Love Unlimited Gwenpool, which gave us our first Aroace canonical superhero. Um, First off, with Gwenpool, what was your approach to balancing Gwenpool's signature humor while also handling such a delicate revelation in her life?
Um, I hmm. It's interesting because I feel like there's two sides to that. I feel like a lot of people have this misconception that uh, ace people are somehow like not funny. They're not joyful people. They don't have good stuff going on in their lives, and like that is obviously not true to anybody who knows anybody on the ace spectrum. Some of the people that I know that have the wildest love of things and people are ace. So like that is kind of thrown out from the beginning. Um, and I think a lot of how we ended up balancing it is sort of a combination of just sort of the humor of like figuring your own stuff out and seeing it later on and not really being able to piece it together until you have the right words for it, because everybody on the team that did that book are all on sort of the ace spectrum somewhere. Um, so it was this funny thing where like I would write something, and even like in some cases as I was writing it, I'd be like, oh man, that's wild that I never picked that up. And then I'd send that script out and get notes back from my editor or my artists that were like, oh my god, I never I never thought about how weird it was, or how much it goes with everything else that like I have this all of us had this intense love of the rogue gambit thing. And I was like, oh, this like relationship that's so sexy because they never touch, they never do any of this stuff. All right, well that's interesting.
That's awesome. And it's so cool to see more representation, especially in animation, whether comic books or I just noticed over your shoulder there's a poster of Alistair from Has Been Hotel right at the booth next to us. Tom Kenny is here, who voices SpongeBob SquarePants, who's canonically asexual. So it's really neat to see some of those stories sort of growing and more diverse. Um, but with how rare Aspec Rep is right now, how did it feel to write that story for Gwenpool and get that out in the world?
It felt really good. It's an interesting thing because we say ace spec, we talk about the ace spectrum, but I think a lot of people don't really understand what that means and how sort of wide an umbrella that is. Um, and then I think in its own way that ace spec umbrella is as wide as the queer umbrella. It covers a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily identify themselves in the same ways. Including myself, I'm demisexual, so like it's quite different from people who are especially aromantic. Like it's very we're pretty far on different ends of that thing. So getting to like tell a story where we get to explore that stuff and tell that story, and also like I think for both her and Nadia, exploring bipolar disorder as well, it was important to have characters to me who like are joyful and they're happy and they don't necessarily fit the stereotypes about what asexuality or mental illness or any of that tend to fall into.
So you just mentioned Nadia Van Dyne, the Unstoppable Wasp, another amazing Marvel character that you've written for. Nadia has since been also revealed to be asexual. And funny enough, it was in a story with Gwenpool. How did you feel about that reveal and the two of them being together for that reveal?
That was amazing. I sort of got the heads up that it was going to happen beforehand, which was nice because we had talked about doing that with Nadia originally. There was some discussion about like whether she would be gay or whether she would be ace, and ace ended up being what we settled on. Um, and then there was not an opportunity to do a story about that. It's not always a reveal that fits as a reveal. It's not always something that people come to a sudden revelation about. Um, so because we had that second volume, the most important thing to me was to get to discussing the bipolar disorder and dealing with that and sort of the legacy of stuff that she got from Hank. So it was it was great to actually see that come through, because at the point that we were writing the book, there was a lot of uh, not a lot of excitement, or I guess support behind the scenes for going that way. I think there was a discussion about wanting the story to be about that, if that's going to be something that pops up. Um, so it was great to finally see that come to pass, and especially it's sort of got to be indirectly a thing I influenced as well, thanks to the Gwenpool story.
Very cool. Yeah, I absolutely loved seeing the two of them together and interacting about their experiences being asexual. Even though it was brief, I'd love to see the two of them, together more. But you also just mentioned her bipolar disorder. As somebody who is not only on the A spec, but I also have ADHD, so seeing more neurodivergent representation is something that I really identify with. Um, what was your approach in writing that aspect of her character?
Uh, well, I feel like my first sort of note on that was like, don't do it like they did with Hank. Like, because Hank's story predates really our understanding of bipolar disorder as it stands right now. And even then, it was very much have the have the fallout first, and then figure out what it is that's wrong with him. And there's a lot of story and mythology around how that story came to be in the first place. But I wanted to have sort of a real like 21st century version of that, where we actually got to handle it and discuss it, and it was with a character who didn't already seem like they were. Hank's always been sort of an ass in the comics. It's just part of his character. Um, so that was the big thing, is I wanted to go a different way than what they'd done. Um, and from there, I did a lot of interviewing of various people throughout writing Wasp, a lot of which was about science. But when it came to writing that arc, I wanted to make sure that everything felt real, that it rang true, that it would be something that was recognizable both to people who deal with bipolar disorder on a daily basis, but to also to people who are uh, caretakers or professionals that are dealing with that sort of thing. Um, so I had a rough idea of what I wanted the story to be, and I ran a lot of like pieces of the script by people. I had several. They're all thanked in the book, but there are people that have bipolar disorder, people who deal with it, and we had an interview in that issue where it's finally dealt with, where uh, rather than having a usual like, we had a lot of interviews with physicists and stuff like that in the back of those issues, because we always had female scientists. We had a psychologist that we interviewed about this, and what this looks like in real life, how it differs from this, what somebody should do if they feel like they're dealing with this, or they have a friend or family member who's dealing with this. So like I came at it from as many different ways as possible. Um, I think at that when we started that arc, we knew like this is where it was going. This is the big center point, and if like we miss this, then we've screwed the whole thing up. And it was a really interesting process, because not only did I do all that, but then Marvel sort of ended up doing their own back end check of things, because I think at some point somebody read that, I think the fifth issue, and was like, hang on, we should have legal look at this. And so like Disney is looking at it, and there's a lot more people involved than there were initially when we started writing this. But I'm really happy with the way it turned out. They were, for the large part, very supportive of the story we were telling. I think their only real note ended up being to change the wording on a few things. They didn't want direct reference to things like suicide. Um, so it's sort of discussed indirectly in the story. Um, but yeah, it was a lot of research, and a lot of like asking questions, and then running it by people, and then making sure I got it right, because I didn't want it to be a situation where we dove in to tell this story, and in the process isolated or offended the sort of people that we were trying to tell a story about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this. I just have one more question to wrap up. what advice would you give to other writers who want to explore aspec or neurodivergent characters and themes in their writing?
Um, I think I think it's an important thing at this point, that not every story about queer people has to be a coming out story. That you can have stories about people who are all under the queer umbrella, all over the ace spectrum, without like that having to be the entire story, or even the point of the story. Um, I think it's important to do research and figure out what you know and what you don't know, because even I think even people who are dealing with a lot of things within this spectrum themselves have very different stories, and a lot of times uh, there's an assumption there that just because you are part of a community that you know everything there is to know about it, and you're not gonna hit any sore spots for other people. Um, so I think it's important to to ask questions and listen, and to tell stories that are about uh, life and about doing things without them necessarily being a coming out story. I think that's been a transition for me, with the exception of the Gwenpool story of like having stories about characters who are queer without them being necessarily about them discovering their queerness or whatever. There's always going to be room for coming out stories, but I think people should maybe leave that to people who have coming out stories that they want to tell about themselves, rather than having to do a big coming out epic for every character. Um, but then it is possible to tell stories about people's lives where those details and those aspects pop up without them being the entire story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Everyone, be sure to check out the description of this video. I'm going to link Jeremy's website there. Check out all of the amazing pieces that he's written. There's a whole table here on the other side of the camera of all the amazing things that he's worked on, from Sea of Thieves to My Little Pony and everywhere in between. Thank you again, Jeremy. This was awesome.
Thank you so much.